Welcome to the December meeting of the Anglo-Malagasy Society. Those eagle-eyed of you among the members who regularly join our meetings will notice that I'm not Chris Brown, who usually chairs our meetings. Chris has had to attend to some urgent family matters today, and so I've stepped into the breach. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniel Austin, the Secretary of the Anglo-Malagasy Society. Special welcome, of course, to those of you. I see several Malagasy names amongst those who've registered for today, and quite a few people who I think are in Madagascar right now who are joining us. So particular welcome to people who haven't been to an Anglo-Malagasy Society meeting either online or offline previously. For those who haven't, just a very brief introduction about the society. The Anglo-Malagasy Society has existed almost since independence. Madagascar's independence. The society was set up in 1961 to foster relations between the UK and Madagascar, to promote all kinds of links between the countries in studying, in business, and just in tourism and everything else. And today, in this this digital era of social media and digital meetings like this, that also extends to a more kind of informal role where we act as a bridge, if you like, between the between Madagascar and the Anglophone world more generally. The society is not in any way political, but of course many of the issues facing Madagascar are political in nature. And so we're very happy to provide a platform to speakers like our speaker today, which of course has a very sort of political topic to discuss sort of the issues facing Madagascar. Now this is the first online meeting we've had for quite some time, because our last two meetings, thankfully, we've been able to get back to having physical meetings again post-COVID. Back in June, of course, we had travel writer John Gimlet, who told us about researching his new book, The Gardens of Mars, Gardens of Mars, Madagascar, an Island Story. And then at our daytime meeting in October, we had speakers were Dr. Maria Voronsova, who spoke about the extensive activities of Kew Gardens in Madagascar, and also in more detail about her Grasslands and Pastures project. We also had a talk from Charlotte Baker, who's the founder and director of Small Steps for Africa, about the important work that her charity does and for the projects it supports in Madagascar in the last decade since that was set up. And we also enjoyed a screening of Tahiri Hunku, which is a short film by Blue Ventures, the marine conservation organization, about a community mangrove carbon project in Madagascar. So that's some of the recent events that we've had, physical events. We're now, for the winter, back to doing online events. I invite people to visit our website or our Facebook page to see the program for the upcoming months. The dates for the whole of 2023 are already up there, so you can find dates for your diary online. And then, as usual, a recording of this meeting will be available on our website as well. So those of you who can't stay for the whole meeting, or others who are joining later or can't come at all, they'll be able in a few days, at least once it's uploaded to the website, to see the meeting again. Okay, so I'll stop wittering on and just without further ado introduce our main speaker, who is Nathaniel Adams. Nathaniel is a US attorney by day, and is joining us from the US now. But he's been visiting Madagascar since his college days. And like many of us, has kind of grown concerned about many of the issues facing Madagascar. And I think no matter whether you live in Madagascar, are Malagasy yourself, or observe the country from the outside, and no matter which side of the political spectrum you sit on, I think everyone would agree that Madagascar has a great deal more potential than it necessarily has managed to succeed in fulfilling since independence. And so Nathaniel has recently, and when I say recently, I mean in the last week or two, a book has just come out by Nathaniel, just been published, and I'm lucky enough to have one of the first copies of The Tragedy of Madagascar, An Island Nation Confronts the 21st Century. So we're going to hear a little bit about what's covered in this book. And so if I invite Nathaniel now to unmute himself, and you can share your screen so we can see, and you can give a little introduction about
Sure.
connections with Madagascar. Welcome.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to all of you for joining today. It's a real honor and a privilege to address a group like this with such a long-standing interest in Madagascar, one that I share. I think I'll go ahead and share my screen while I'm giving a little bit of bio information. There we go. Okay, so as Daniel said, I'm an attorney in the United States, but I have a long-standing interest in the great island of Madagascar. I studied there when I was a university student for about 3 or 4 months. I lived with a family, had an extraordinary experience, and really wanted to keep in touch with people who lived there. And so I returned several times since. And I always had this idea of writing a book about Madagascar. It took me a little longer than I thought it would. Life sort of intervened and led to other things, but I finally got around to it and completed it and published it this year. So one thing I want to say right off the bat is that, I'd love to hear from you as an audience, not just today, but going forward. So my email address is at the back of the book. Daniel also has that. So if you want to reach out to him, he can pass that along as well after we're done. So let me start by talking about the title. Why the tragedy of Madagascar? Why are we calling this a tragedy? Why am I calling it a tragedy? That word really refers to two things here. The first is a specific historical event, one that took place in early 2009, when between 35 and 40 people were killed in front of the presidential palace during a protest march that led to the departure of the then president, Marc Ravalomanana, and the ascension of the person who's actually the president today, Andry Rajoelina. For many people, this was a dramatic event in Malagasy history. It's sort of a point of departure for my book. And I think for a lot of people in Madagascar today, your feelings about the events that day really inform how you feel about the current president, the past president, and really the direction of Madagascar. So that's the first one. The other one, the second reason why I call it a tragedy, is really the unfolding tragedy that's taking place in Madagascar and has been going on for decades. So Madagascar's people are getting poorer, or at least their standard of living has been declining, and we'll look at a chart in a minute that really sets that out. This is in sharp contrast to what's happening in the rest of the world. In the early 80s, about 44% of people were living in extreme poverty. That number has been plummeting ever since, to the point now where we're around 10%, or were just before the COVID pandemic. And a lot of experts think we'll be at about 5% in a decade or so. The UN set forth these metrics in about 1990, called the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. The first of those was to reduce extreme poverty around the world by 2015 by 50%. And we reached that goal pretty easily, well ahead of schedule around the world. Unfortunately, in Madagascar, they actually saw an increase in their rate of extreme poverty. And as you see there, the same is true for hunger in terms of undernourishment. The rest of the world made great strides in eliminating undernourishment. In Madagascar, there was a slight increase as well. So that's more of a tragedy for the island as a whole. Here's the chart I was talking about. What I like about this one is it sets out the living standards of Malagasy people, accounting for both population growth and for inflation. So, you see soon after independence, the country was starting to do well. A Marxist takeover in the early 70s started it on this downward descent, which has really continued ever since. And if you look at the tail end of that chart, you can see where the political crises really affected the nation's economy and the well-being of people on the island. Right around 2002, there was a crisis again in 2008 or 9, the one I referred to earlier, when things started to tick up. Those crises hit and the economy starts to slide and people suffer. So I want to offer 4 reasons why we've seen this decline in living standards and a decline in really the fortunes of Madagascar as a whole. And the first one would be, I think, the most obvious to everyone who follows Madagascar, and that is political dysfunction. So there was so much hope in the early 90s when Madagascar made this transition from its former dictator to something resembling democracy. I was there for the first time soon after this took place. The Council of Churches led a movement to replace Ratsiraka. A new constitution was ratified in 92. A new president was democratically elected in 1993. The transition was swift and relatively peaceful. There were, protests, a few deaths, but not as many as we've seen in other countries. And so people were really hopeful that democracy would take hold and last. It's been sort of a stop and start progression for democracy in Madagascar, as many of you know. Some people characterize it as 1 step forward and 2 steps back. There have been political crises, coups and counter coups throughout Madagascar's history since this moment. So it's been a long struggle, and that's really hurt the country's development, as we saw in that graph just a minute ago. The other political development that I think has had somewhat of a negative effect on the country's development is this 2-man rivalry that's emerged and really grown over the last 20 years between the former president, Marc Ravalomanana, who I may refer to just as Marc informally in this presentation, and Andry Rajoelina. The 3 have now squared off directly or indirectly 3 different times. The first was the showdown or the coup that I referenced earlier, taking place in 2008 and 2009. This led to Ravalomanana's overthrow, and we'll look at this in a little more detail on the next slide. The second occurred in 2018 when they faced off in the nation's presidential elections just a few years ago, and Rajoelina defeated Marc handily, and is now finishing his first 5-year term. I would say the third showdown between the 2 really occurred the year after that in 2019 in the legislative elections. They weren't on the ballot themselves, but the 2 men were leading the 2 parties in these legislative elections. Once again, Rajoelina's party did much better than Ravalomanana's. And so, while the feud is still bitter, there's no love lost between these 2 men. In fact, when I interviewed Ravalomanana as part of the book, he refused to say the new president's name. He just referred to him as he or the president. And so while the feud goes on, there has been a decisive victor in this rivalry, and that's been Andry Rajoelina, and we'll talk a little bit about him today. But I think overall, this dynamic of just having 2 people at the top of the political pyramid facing off against each other year after year has really not been a positive development for Malagasy democracy. So let's go back to the events of 2009, because I said this was a real turning point, a dramatic turning point in Madagascar's history. So, at the end of 2008, Marc was president. Rajoelina was then the mayor of Antananarivo, the capital city, and had become highly critical of the sitting president. He had a TV station. He aired an interview by someone denouncing Ravalomanana. Marc grew very upset by this and shut down Rajoelina's TV station. This led to Rajoelina going to the streets, taking people on mass protests throughout Antananarivo that took place for several months. This led to the massacre in front of the presidential palace that I talked about earlier. So what happened that day in February of 2009? Well, there was a section of downtown Antananarivo that people had dubbed Democracy Square, and this is where the protests led to every day. This is where people met. Fiery speeches were given denouncing the president and the need for change. There was a guy named Monja Roindefu who went on to become Rajoelina's prime minister. He gave a very aggressive speech against Ravalomanana, fired people up. People said, he asked the crowd, what should we do next? and a couple people said, let's go to the palace. Let's go march to the presidential palace. And he said, okay, let's go. So that's what happened. They went to the palace, and they confronted the presidential guards. One thing led to another, and over 35 people were shot dead in the streets. And I would just pause there and ask any of you if this sounds familiar to any of you who follow American politics. It should, because if you go back just a couple of years ago, January 6, 2021, we had President Trump calling on his supporters, basically an angry mob of people, to go march on the Capitol in Washington, D.C. They did so, violence broke out, and innocent people were killed. So I think the lesson here, whether you're in Madagascar or in Washington, D.C., is if you're in a position of power, don't call on people, especially an angry mob of people who may be armed, to go to the seat of power and protest that way. Usually bad things happen, violence ensues, although you could make the argument that maybe that was their intention all along. So to go back to Madagascar, now we're in March of 2009. Rajoelina has been put under house arrest for everything that's happened, but the international condemnation of Ravalomanana after the massacre has become so loud that that he can no longer continue in power. In fact, the decisive event occurs when an elite group of army members known as CAPSAT switch sides from Ravalomanana's side to Rajoelina, and Marc knows that the writing is on the wall, that he's going to have to step down. But then in one final dramatic move, he decides not to hand over power to his rival Rajoelina. That would be too much, too humiliating for him. So he gives power to a 3-man military directorate. And his hope is that once tensions calm down, that this group will either hand power back to him or at least hold elections in which he can run. But then something very dramatic happens. The 3-member team is kidnapped. They are held incommunicado for up to 24 hours. They emerge the next day, and just out of the blue, they say, we've had some time to think about this. We're not going to hold on to power. We're not going to give it back to Marc. We're going to transfer power to Andry Rajoelina. And the High Constitutional Court deemed both transfers of power from Marc to the directorate and from the directorate to Rajoelina constitutional. And Rajoelina took over. Marc flees to South Africa in exile. So who is Andry Rajoelina? He is, again, the former mayor of Antananarivo. He comes from a middle-class family in Ansero Bay, in the Highlands. He started out as a disc jockey in Antananarivo, and in a lot of international stories or news media reports about him, you still see him referred to as a former disc jockey, which I found interesting. He formed his own media company, and by his early 30s, his TV and radio stations had come to dominate the island. He'd become a wealthy man. He turned his attention to politics, just as Marc had done earlier, runs for mayor in 2007, wins easily, and his rise has been unstoppable ever since, regardless of how you feel about him. And I have some positive and negative things to say about him in the book. I think there's no denying that his ambition, his charisma, his communication skills have made him the most formidable Malagasy politician in a generation. As I said, we've been really dealing with him for almost 20 years now, and he's up for re-election next year. So when he came into power, he said, give me a year before you judge me. A lot of things have happened. I need to put my people and my programs in place. So give me some time before you judge me. The problem that arose was that almost a year after he took office, he was faced with something that he and other leaders around the world never saw coming. And this was, of course, COVID-19. Madagascar suffered relatively few deaths from the pandemic, which was fortunate. This was the case throughout Africa, I think, and epidemiologists are still trying to understand why that was. One reason, I think, is that the population of Madagascar and across Africa is so young. Their immune systems are strong, robust, intact, unlike a lot of the older populations in the West, where we saw death rates much higher. Could have been just a matter of testing as well. But this was a huge scare for Madagascar when it first hit. You see the statistic up on the screen there. Just to put this in perspective, we had 170,000 ventilators ready to go here in the US when COVID broke. They had just 6. in Madagascar. So a lot of economic pain, a lot of businesses closed, but things could have been much worse. One more thing to point out about Andry Rajoelina's handling of the pandemic, he earned both praise and ridicule, I would say, for his promotion of something called COVID organics. This was an herbal remedy that you drink, and if you look online, you can find a lot of pictures of him drinking this remedy. It was supposed to both prevent and cure COVID. It was never put through any clinical trials. It was laughed at by a lot of doctors and medical teams in the international community. But I must say, when I was in Madagascar last year, I talked to a lot of people who swore by it, and they said it really helped a lot of people here. My cousin took it, for example, not me personally, but they told me my cousin took it, and he felt much better. So take from that what you will. Crisis mostly averted in terms of COVID-19 in Madagascar. Just quickly, so how democratic is Madagascar today? There's a bunch of different metrics we can use. One of them, probably the most famous, the most well-known, comes from Freedom House. They rank every country's, giving them a score using based on their political rights and civil liberties. Madagascar received a score of 61 out of 100. Not great if you put that in context. Canada, I think, had the highest score of 98. For those of you in the UK, congratulations, you're at 93. And mostly because of the events of the last few years here in the US, we have now slipped to 83. Corruption, a weak legislature relative to the president, all of those things diminish Madagascar's score. And at the bottom there, you see just last year in July of 2021, there was another coup attempt. I don't know if any of you know more about it than I do. I don't know a whole lot, but a few active and retired military officers tried to overthrow Rajoelina. The coup attempt failed. The leaders were arrested, but just another reminder that the state of democracy remains fragile. I mentioned that Rajoelina is finishing up his first term. He is going to run for a second term. He's widely expected at this point to win. My sources tell me that there's no really credible challenger at this point. Marc Ravalomanana, who's been his chief rival, as I said, for these past 20 years, is sort of a spent force. He's getting older. I'm not even sure if he will run next year, but most people don't give him much of a fighting chance. And it's not clear who will be a real challenger to Rajoelina. Rajoelina has already distributed within the government a list of his development plans for his next term, which seems a pretty confident move, but that's how he is. And we'll talk about some of those later in the presentation. So that was the first reason for Madagascar's demise, was the political dysfunction. The second is really the lack of opportunity that we see throughout the island, and most specifically with people who are caught in extreme poverty. And the term trapped in poverty is not just one that I'm using glibly. That is a term used by development economists to describe the situation where poverty, when a country is too poor to make the basic investments it needs to escape extreme poverty. And we know this is the condition that a majority of Madagascar's people still live in. And as the chart showed earlier, this has not changed in decades. Now, the political instability definitely contributes to this phenomenon. The coup in 2009 led to living standards declining once again. The World Bank actually put out a report in 2014 and said that without that political crisis 5 years earlier, Madagascar's economy would have grown twice as fast as it actually did, just showing how important political stability is in places like Madagascar. And they had a sentence that I quoted here in their executive summary that I think summed it up well. It said, Madagascar has been entirely unsuccessful in reducing the number of people who are poor or extremely so. And again, this puts them in just a small handful of countries that you don't want to be in, that are not developing. So what does that mean for people caught in poverty? Well, I interviewed a lot of them as part of the book, and as you can imagine, their life is extremely hard. Just to give you an example of one person, I met a young woman in Gladonia in the north. She was in her early 20s. She was a single mother, had a 2 or 3 year old son, and she lived in an apartment with no running water. So what she had to do was wake up not every morning, but 3 or 4 times a week, 1 o'clock in the morning, to go to the village tap to bring back water to where she lived for cooking, cleaning, etc. Many times the line was too long, or she got there too late. She had to come back at 3 a.m. And sometimes there wasn't water at all. So she would have to go to a larger municipal tap over an hour away. She was doing this 3 or 4 times a week, waking up in the middle of the night to do this, in addition to keeping her full-time job during the day. She eats only rice and water. She and her son, only rice and water twice a day. Once in a while, they will splurge and get a small fish from the market, which she will cut up into small pieces and feed to her son for a source of protein and try to make it last several days. And again, Madagascar's per capita GDP, once you adjust it for inflation, is the same as it was in 1990. So very little to any progress being made at all. The lack of opportunity I talked about is not just something that the extremely poor have to deal with. It's also for what you might call not the middle class, but people who are being educated, who aspire to the middle class in Madagascar. So I spent some time interviewing recent college graduates in Madagascar and learning about their experience, their job prospects, their level of hope for the future for themselves and for their country. And one thing I found was an enormous level of frustration because they couldn't find professional jobs. The jobs that they had trained for, that they had gone to school for, simply weren't available. The economy in Madagascar was simply too sluggish to support all the young people clamoring for jobs. And we see this in the statistics. The inequality level between those with college degrees and those without university degrees has actually been declining in Madagascar. Just the reverse of what we've seen in the Western world and advanced economies, where inequality has become such a hot button issue because those with skills and those with education are doing so much better than everyone else. In Madagascar, things are staying the same, or there's actually declining inequality because so many people are forced to take non-professional jobs. And the situation gets worse if you look at the bottom bullet point there. Many people have to offer bribes once they are hired. So, play this out. You get hired, you run the gauntlet. You're one of 20 or one of 50 people if you're from your graduating class who have been offered a real job, and you show up with your hiring manager, and he or she says, "Congratulations, we'd like to hire you, but before we can start paying you, you have to pay us." And that's obviously not a good way to run an economy. So the third issue that I want to talk about, we've talked about political dysfunction, the lack of economic opportunity, is the exploding population in Madagascar. So Madagascar's population has been growing at an alarming rate really since independence. It's up to 26 or 27 million now, up from 5 million at independence and 15 million at the turn of the millennium. This is somewhat similar to what we've seen globally. You probably read, we just passed 8 billion people on the planet recently. We're headed for between 10.5 and 11 billion by the end of the century. Experts tell us that we'll need at least 50% more food to feed all of those people, and that's going to be quite a challenge. Madagascar is not like some smaller countries like, say, Rwanda, where population density is so great that it led to a genocide in that case. There is ample space, ample land for people to move to, but not all of that is productive land in Madagascar. And the point here really is that the economy is just growing too slowly to accommodate all of these people, and there are just repeated cycles of humanitarian emergencies when economic shocks hit, or in the south, for example, when famine conditions start to take hold. So, the UN Population Division puts out projections for each country's expected population growth over the next 50 to 100 years. And it shows some pretty scary statistics for Madagascar, in my opinion. It shows them rising from their current level of 26 million to 54 million by mid-century, basically, doubling the population, and growing to almost 100 million people by 2100. This rate of growth makes it one of the fastest growing countries. Things will start to level off as we get to the end of the century. The fertility rate will decline from just over 4 children per woman to just over 2, basically replacement level. The population under 18 will also decline. An interesting one is the urban population phenomenon we're seeing across Africa, really growing at a very fast rate. By the end of the century, we'll have about 2/3 of Malagasy people living in cities, which is the opposite of what we've seen in that country up until now. But the big point here again is that the population will start to slow down. The growth rates will start to slow down by the end of the century. But how they manage between then and now, how they manage to deal with 100 million people, 50 million people, when their economy can barely keep up now, is going to be an enormous challenge. I'll just skip this one, but the most recent country to reach 100 million people was Egypt. And suffice it to say that things are not going well there. The poverty rate is 30%, 32% and rising. The last area that I want to cover before talking about the future of Madagascar for a few minutes is climate change. And when we're talking about climate change in Madagascar, we're really talking about the southern half of the island. That's the dry desert area that we've heard so much about. And climate change affects different countries differently. In some places, it's rising sea levels. Some places, it's top tropical storms. In Madagascar, droughts are really the phenomenon that have become so pernicious, that become so damaging to the southern half of the island. And what we've seen over the last decade is the rainy season has shrunk from its traditional length of time of 6 months a year to now just 2 or 3, not nearly long enough for farmers to grow their crops. In 2018, for example, the staple crop production in the south was over 50% lower than it was just 10 years earlier. It stands to reason that severe malnutrition has begun to spike in that region. And when people get really desperate, we've seen them resorting to eating cactus or locusts just to stay alive. So I don't know about you in the UK, but here in the US, we don't get a lot of media stories, international news about Madagascar. But when we do now, it seems to be always about the climate crisis. I mean, maybe you've seen that as well. So Time Magazine, a big weekly news magazine here in the US, a few years ago declared Madagascar to be the first climate-caused famine in history. And unfortunately, the situation is getting worse rather than better. Part of that is because of the government's response, which I would say has been woefully inadequate. The international community is doing as much as they can, but their funds are limited as well. And when there really is a major drought, I talked to several people in the South. They said there's really nothing that anyone can do. People are going to die. And to talk about the lack of response by the national government, I met with I spent a lot of time in southern Madagascar. I met with the village president of Fokap, a small village on the very southern tip of Madagascar. And he was a great guy, was very open with me. And he said, when famine starts to strike here, when the rains are really bad and we can't feed all of our people, I don't even bother calling the national government. I call the international agencies like the UN World Food Program. I call them first because I know they're going to be more helpful. I think, unless you've been living under a rock over the past 10 years, you know that this has been on the front burner issue for the entire world. All the nations of the world came together in 2015 in Paris to set a target of limiting emissions to limiting the warming from emissions to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. When I wrote the book, we are making some progress. When I finished this chapter of the book a year or so ago, the most likely scenario was 3 degrees of warming. I think the most recent update from the UN in the last month or two put it at about 2.5 or maybe just above that. So, some people, I guess we should consider that progress, but as their report pointed out, even at 2.5 degrees of warming, if we get stuck there, it's going to result in, as they said, untold suffering for hundreds of millions of people around the world. One good piece of news that came out of the most recent climate conference I wanted to touch on in Egypt last month or 2 months ago was that rich countries that have been the source of all these carbon emissions for the last 2 centuries finally agreed to establish a fund to help poor countries cope with the climate disasters that they really had little that they weren't responsible for in the first place. So that's one good takeaway. As I said, the experts say that we're going to need 50% more food as climate change wreaks havoc over the next 50 to 70 years. And there's really two ways, crop yields will start to fall as the planet warms. 2 solutions that are obvious. One, you need to find more drought-resistant seeds, and scientists are working on that. Or you need to find more land that will grow the crops that farmers need. In Madagascar, unfortunately, what a lot of people have been doing, what a lot of farmers have been doing, is destroying the forests. They're doing that primarily, I think, to get charcoal to cook with. But a secondary reason is because the land that they're currently using to grow things on isn't as productive as it used to be. Now, for anyone studying the climate, we know that this is probably the worst thing that you could do. Forests are such an amazing storage facility for carbon, and by destroying them, you're really doing damage to your own economic prospects, because that's only going to increase the temperature increase and come back to hurt southern Madagascar. So what is southern life like in southern Madagascar? I spent about 3 months crisscrossing the southern half of the island, mostly by bus, sometimes renting vehicles and going across. And you see a lot of people suffering. Stunting is high in nearly half the communes in the south. When I was there, they were in some state of nutritional emergency. There were some near famine conditions. As I said, the rainy season is now only a couple months long. Drought season is now 6 months long. And it's really a fascinating, if depressing, place to visit. And if any of you have a chance to go, I would highly encourage you. It's not for the faint of heart. It's rough travel. It's not going to Disneyland, but you will learn a lot about the climate crisis and about southern Madagascar. So a couple other features to mention: population growth is high in the south, precisely in the part of the country which can least afford to add more people to their communities. That's where we see high population growth, causing more people to emigrate to places like Tuliar, further north into Madagascar, where I was in FOCAP for an extended period of time. The situation gotten so bad that parents could not pay the school fees anymore. Only 40% of the families were sending their children to school. Many people eating just once a day at night, as opposed to two times a day, which they did traditionally. So there are some good ideas for how to alleviate the crisis in the south. Conserving more water when the rain does fall, finding new ways to irrigate the south using pipelines from more fertile regions. Desalinization is a really interesting one. Madagascar is currently working with a team from Israel on how to desalinize all the ocean water that's around them. The problem with that is it's very expensive to take salt water and turn it into fresh water. And so the Saudi Arabia is actually the leader of this. They spend a ton of money doing this every year, but they have many more resources than Madagascar obviously does. And so, as I said, the situation in the south will probably get worse before it gets better. Last point is that it's not just rising temperatures that are hurting the south. It's also the traditional ways and customs that people have clung to, the resistance to modernization. And that's not really a normative judgment, one that I'm making. This is what I found from leaders throughout the south. They want things to change so that people will be more open to new technologies, new ways of doing things. Large families remain the norm. Most villagers in FOCAP that I talked to are still having 6 children or more. Child marriage is common. With all these children, parents can't support all of them. Usually the girls are the ones that they try to hand off first. I can tell you this from personal experience. The hotel I was staying at in FOCAP had this restaurant, a patio outside the hotel, where I would have breakfast every day. And there was a girl there who I later found out was 13 years old. And she would, help out at the restaurant. She would serve me coffee every morning. One day I struck up a short conversation with her. Bonjour, how are you? It didn't last more than 20 seconds. The next day, sure enough, her father showed up at the restaurant and said, Monsieur, I heard you had a nice conversation with my daughter yesterday. And I looked at him and said, well, kind of, not really sure where he was going with that. And he said, listen, if you want to marry her and take her to the United States with you, you have my consent. I'll sign whatever document you need. We would be honored for you to take her with you. And I said, thank you, sir, but no, thank you. I think I'll just finish my eggs and pretend that this conversation never happened. So, we know that societies that educate and empower their young women grow at a faster rate than those that don't. And we certainly see that in Madagascar. The last point is just on the family tombs. There's a tribe there known as the Mahafali in southern Madagascar. They and others construct these ornate, elaborate family tombs outside of the cities or the villages where they live. Really remarkable to see. The problem is that they're getting increasingly expensive as their families grow and more family members pass on. So they can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, money that would be much better spent on their existing relatives. As one village elder told me, it's been a challenge to convince people to care as much about the living as they do about the dead. So I don't know how we're doing on time here, Daniel. I'd like to continue just for 5 minutes or so if I could.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So, those are the four primary reasons I see that Madagascar has really struggled since independence. If we turn our attention to the future, which is always a risky endeavor, I certainly don't know more about what's going to happen than you do. So I'd love to hear your opinions. But just to give you a couple predictions, maybe provocative ones that will get you thinking and you can agree or disagree with. But I do think Rajoelina will be reelected and probably become even more powerful. But without the excuse of COVID that he's had during his first term, the pressure on him to produce more economic results will inevitably rise. And, we've seen so many coup attempts, even one just last year, that I think if that doesn't happen, I think another coup attempt could be possible, even though he is such a dominant figure on that island. He's going to continue to try to modernize the country. Modernization is something that he talks about all the time. So he's going to build, for example, a cable car system in Antananarivo. For those of you who have been to Tana, you know how congested it is, how difficult it is to move around. Next time you go, you may be able to take a cable car from Analakeli to Korondrano to Lake Anuzi and other places. A new national highway directly from Diego in the north to Chuliar in the south. And then modern housing in all of the big cities. You see some modern apartment buildings now in Antananarivo, really none in the other big cities. He wants to change that. What I haven't seen from him yet is really a comprehensive plan to, for example, alleviate poverty and assist with climate change in the south. So he's focusing on the modernization aspect of Madagascar. The extreme poverty situation on the island is one that I think still needs to be addressed. The population will continue to grow. Enormous challenges to feed, house, and educate all of those new people. And then the South will be, the biggest challenge of all. I do think there will be some success at modernizing the southern half of Madagascar, but it will face more recurrent humanitarian crises. And, a large-scale famine in the South in the next 10 years is within the realm of possibility. Another thing to think about, culture, I haven't talked too much about this today, but there's 18 ethnic groups in Madagascar. Many of you already know that. The Marina have traditionally been the most dominant, the most powerful, going back to the Marina kingdoms of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They were suppressed during the colonial period, came back even stronger afterwards. There was a good book written actually in the UK a few years ago that talked about power in Madagascar, and it found that, while the Marina are only 26 or a little more percent of the population, they represent 76% of the economic elite on the island. And pressure is building from outside of the highlands to build a more inclusive society. I think that pressure will only grow. Leaders in major cities outside of Antananarivo have told me, unless more power is given to us, at some point, we will find ways to take it. And as this report said, I quoted it here at the bottom, the social order in Madagascar is not set in stone, and an already fragile state could become a state of chaos if a more inclusive society is not established. And then last one, something to think about, the rise of China. This may seem like an odd topic when we're talking about Madagascar, but China is already the third largest trading partner for the island after France and the United States, and it's closing the gap rapidly. And actually, the second largest number of Chinese nationals in any country in Africa is in Madagascar. And so, their soft power is growing along with their economic power. Madagascar has been all too happy to welcome them. They joined the Belt and Road Initiative, this global, huge infrastructure and development project led by Xi Jinping in 2017. And China's intentions for Madagascar are still unclear, whether this is just a way to, ensure continued energy supplies from places like Madagascar to China, or whether there's more geopolitical aspect remains to be seen. But I can tell you, when I was there, and even now, there are at least 20 large-scale development projects underway, led by China, including a new highway system, conference centers, new hospitals, etc. So that's really my presentation. I talked about 4 areas that have held Madagascar back, talked a little bit about where Madagascar may be heading. and what its future looks like, things to watch out for. So Daniel, I think I'll turn it back to you to open it up for questions. But again, not just today, but I'd love to hear from all of you. If you read the book, what you think about the book, what you think about what's happening in Madagascar. Daniel's got my email address, so please feel free to reach out.
Thanks very much for that insightful, if rather sobering analysis of the situation and the future in Madagascar. Maybe I can kick off the questions by asking one, and then I'll see who else has a question. You spoke mainly about internal factors in Madagascar, and besides climate change, of course. And apart from just touching on China at the end there, really only mentioned other countries in the context of sort of World Food Programme and things like that. But it's a pretty commonly held view in Madagascar that it's primarily interference from other nations that are holding the country back, whether that's France or China or Russia or US or a combination of everyone. And of course, there's some truth in that, but on the other hand, every influential nation is always battling to try and have some control over probably most other countries in the world. So I just wondered to what extent you think those sort of external factors, deliberate interference, either at a state level or at a high level, are to blame for sort of Madagascar's lack of progress, if you like, kind of failing to fulfill the potential that it has.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think I don't put a lot of stock in those arguments, to be honest. I mean, Madagascar is unique in that it's an island off the coast of Africa. It's a part of Africa. Politically, it's part of the African Union, but it also likes to think of itself as something different. And I guess part of the struggle has been to find its role in the world. Is it an African nation? Is it an Indian Ocean nation? Is it going to fall under China's orbit? Is it still going to retain close links with its former colonial power, France? But I don't think you can really blame external factors, external countries at least, for what's happening in Madagascar. There are too many examples of other developing nations that have overcome whatever interference has been leveled against them, for Madagascar to use that excuse for very long. Now, the two issues that are global that I spoke about, population growth and climate change, those are global in nature. Those are certainly holding Madagascar back. But to say that state-led interference by Europe or I'm not sure who it would be, other nations, I think is a tactic that a lot of strong leaders use to explain away their own failures and to explain away things that have not gone well in their country.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone else has more questions for Nathaniel, then if you raise your hand. James Mason has a question.
Hi there. First of all, Nathaniel, many thanks for the talk. That's really fascinating. I'm just back from Madagascar and I wish I had your book with me because I think I've answered a lot of questions. One very brief point, just to carry on from Daniel's point, is that point you make about whether foreign powers are meddling in Madagascar or words to that effect. I suppose there's a worry or do you think there's a worry that if the Malagasy people believe there is, then that is almost the same effect, because their governments can simply blame these mysterious foreign powers for their issues? Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, that's a common tactic that leaders use when things are not going well. And perception is reality in the case of the Malagasy people. Rajoelina has used that argument very well, I think, and will continue to use that heading into the election next year. So, absolutely, that's a powerful argument that people make. As you know, the education levels in Madagascar are not extremely high, so people believe their leaders when they tell them things. And if this is the common refrain that outside powers are meddling and causing problems in Madagascar, then I'm sure that will resonate.
Yeah, thanks, sir. And very, very briefly, before I went to Madagascar, I read a few, I'd say, Western books about Madagascar and the political situation. I found they were all very kind to Marc, the former president. And yet when I was in Madagascar, there was very few people I found at all who had a positive sentiment of him. Is there a reason why we are perhaps more likely to find him a more palatable president?
That's a great comment, because I found exactly the same thing. when I went to Madagascar and started writing this book, I had a positive view of Marc Ravalomanana based on what I had read, and based on some of the economic data I'd reviewed. And I had a lesser opinion of the current president. That began to change as I went to Madagascar and talked to the people. They are really enthralled, or at least large segments of the population are enthralled with Rajoelina, and he has become so powerful, as we know. I think that's a fascinating question. I'd love to hear what other people think about that. You know, again, Rajoelina is a fantastic politician. His political skills are off the charts, and he can show up and speak to people in a way that really resonates with them, that connects with them. You know, just to give a couple examples, when he went to Tamatave, he said that we are going to make the beaches of Tamatave like Miami beaches, and people love that. He went to Sambab, the vanilla producing region, and he said, you know, at that point the price of vanilla was 100,000 RER per kilo. He said, we're not gonna double it or triple it. We're gonna increase it to 600,000 RER per kilo. It really hasn't changed in price since then, but he's really good at creating a lot of excitement about his policies and his ideas, even if some of them don't turn out to work. And you know, Marc, I think, is seen as corrupt these days, but the end of his presidency was marred by a lot of corruption that that really damaged his reputation in the country.
Thank you.
I see another hand up, Cedric, who I think is one of our current Chevening scholars from Madagascar studying in the UK. You have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I think it was very, very interesting. Indeed, I am Cedric. I am one of the scholars right now studying in the UK. I have a strong interest in today's discussion as it's related to my course here in youth and international development. Hence, I would have to ask 3 questions, if you don't mind. So I've roughly read the synopsis, and it says, you've spent roughly 9 months in Madagascar during while writing for the books for your research. So have you able to have a large insight of Madagascar's, the Malagasy ethnography, because it's known to be one of the have a very diverse, wealthy cultural background. So have you able, I know you mentioned you visited the south, but have you able to visit other regions for your research, to base your research? Second query, struggling to progress. So I would be interested to know your definition of progress here. Is it income-based, economic, political, socially based? And third question, last questions. What was the motivation behind writing about this book? What do you want your audience, your readers, to take away from this book? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cedric. You were breaking up a little bit there, but I think I got all 3 of those, so I'll just try to answer them quickly since there were 3. Yeah, I tried to visit as many regions as I could. I focused my research in Tananarivo for the political aspect. I was in the north near Diego, Sambab for some economic research, and then the climate change piece, I was in the south for an extended period, up to 3 months. My definition of progress, I think we should start with economic, you know, per capita GDP. Let's see incomes start to improve. I think if you ask, you know, people who are extremely poor in Madagascar, their definition of progress would be, you know, I'd like to make a little more money so that I can feed my families better than I've been able to. And then my motivation for writing the book, again, Madagascar is a place I love. This turned out to be a fairly negative book about Madagascar, but this is a place I, you know, lived in and studied in when I was a university student. I've been back several times. I've got a lot of friends there. So, you know, it's really to bring Madagascar to light to the rest of the world, maybe to make them realize what's going on there, and hopefully to inspire people to bring change to Madagascar.
Thanks. Teresa, I think you had a question. You need to unmute yourself.
I'm interested to hear about the background of Rajoelina, because when I was visiting, I used to visit every 2 years. I've been unable to recently, as you can understand. I was representing a development charity, and I have to say, in the 4 years of Ravalomanana's, there was more development than there was in 25 years of Rajoelina. And I saw some absolutely inspirational things that sprung up during his time. Why did he get such a bad name? I didn't see the corruption, of course, I suppose. That was obvious to people who were close to the ground, and I was a visitor. But I would have thought the visible development that I saw, the people making roads and getting paid for doing it, through their village wide enough for an ambulance to go through, the people getting water supply that had never had water supply before, the bridges built where a bridge was urgently needed and they had to wade waist high through water to evacuate their sick. Absolutely amazing things went on during Ravalomanana's reign.
Yeah, so
why did that not sort of permeate a bit clearer through the population?
well, I think it did. To answer your question directly, he was elected twice by the people of Madagascar. The economy was starting to improve during his second term, but the short answer is he was overthrown by someone who had a personal interest in overthrowing him. The events of 2008 and 2009 really spun out of everyone's control. When I talked to people who were involved with the coup, they said when we started these street protests, we never thought it would lead to Rajoelina becoming president. We thought it may lead to Ravalomanana stepping down. So coups are like that. They're not necessarily the reflection of a majority. And Ravalomanana was seen by large segments of the population as corrupt by his second term, but he was also popular, and the country was starting to make some headway. So I agree with you that it was a fairly shocking development when he was overthrown, and it would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he continued and been in power for another 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I do slightly query your figures on COVID, because I know personally 6 people who died from COVID, and I had emails coming from all sorts of people saying, for example, that lorries, plural, were leaving Tananarive every night and going to Emerentiatuska, which is where I used to work, presumably to the space left by the NASA station to bury the dead. But there were hundreds and thousands going out of dead being taken out of Tananarive. Is it not more likely to be fake figures?
Very possible. You seem to know more about that than I do. I'm using the official figures, which were not very high, but very possible. Testing levels were very low in Madagascar.
And it was friends of mine who finally persuaded Rajoelina to accept vaccines from outside. And I think something like 1% of Malagasy are now vaccinated.
Right. Yeah. The resistance to vaccination is still ongoing. I talk to my friends there frequently, and they say I hear all sorts of conspiracy theories from them as to why they should not get vaccinated. So that is the reality that we're dealing with still.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. Tina has her hand up.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I asked to get the slides, by the way. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but it would be great to have them if you can share with us. I'm just going to go back to what someone asked on the chat, and also what Teresa said about Ravalomanana. I live there. I live there, and I was there, and I was doing okay, by the way. Like I was just probably mindlessly living my youth and didn't think about politics. But then I think it's a matter of, it's not about what you do to people, it's how you make them feel. And I remember at that time, everyone felt scared of Ravalomanana. Like everyone was so, he was in power, and he had that power, and it was felt. So maybe once you left, people didn't really care about the roads or the hospitals or whatever anymore. It was just that relief that he was finally gone from that power. I'm from Ambatantrazaka, so I know that they took over all the, when I say they, it's more the Ravalomanana's companies or whatever company. Was very entrepreneurial, so he was doing a lot of that, but then it mixed up with politics as well. So it's how he took over all the rice fields and used it for himself or stuff like that. So it's, and also I'm from that region, and there are so many stories about rosewood. Like no one could do rosewood but his family, for example, and there are many stories. The thing is, the Radsiraka or Zaf or whoever, and then now Andry, they are all doing the same thing. But it's no one is great. That's just my point. But with the population is really, really suffering. So it's not really about the sentiment who likes who. It's about the results, and we're dying. People are dying. I went to Madagascar 4 times this year, and even in 3 months, I could see how bad things got every time. But in 3 months, it probably you can't see progress, but it's terrible to see the fall. And yeah, I'm feeling very overwhelmed because I even forgot about all those coups, because it's been a long time ago. And talking about it today while hearing you telling us about how bad it was, actually, it's kind of a bad Christmas gift. I'm so sorry, but I think we need to talk about this. We need to learn more about this. And the final point, it's not really a question, but it's I don't know if it's politically correct, by the way, but we're talking about politics here, but we cannot overlook the France-Afrique antechamber of everything. Even since before Ratsiak and during Ratsiak and all of them, and also with Andry Rajoelina today, that is in the background always. So what's going to happen in the next election probably will depend on that as well. So it all started with slavery and then colonization, and then all the France-Afrique still going on, and all of us poor Malagasy people are just dying. And we can discuss this in all the perspectives, from the West, from the East, but the history started back then, and I don't know if it will ever get to a better place. But yeah, thank you for listening to a very overwhelmed Tina. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Tina. That was I could hear the emotion in your voice, and as a Malagasy person, I'm sure I hope that this presentation resonated with you. Maybe you learned a little bit about your country that you didn't know, and it sounds like you have the passion and the interest in making things better for your people. So I wish you the best.
Okay, it looks like I think 2 or 3 more questions. Ulrika, did you have your hand up a moment ago? If we could just, if we can perhaps fit in 3 fairly
yes, I did. Thank
concise
you.
questions.
I had a question really about the level of the crime in Madagascar at the moment, because I'm I live in England, but I'm German, and I'm a member of the German association, the German Malagasy Society, and also from a very small one in Munich, where we are supporting a school and run scholarships and everything. And the situation has so deteriorated in the last 5 or 6 years that now all the kids that we were supporting, who were getting into schools and actually getting on, have now need almost police support in order to be able to get to the schools. And there have been attacks on the schools and all over. I mean, this is just in the last few years that because I've been in Madagascar for the last 20 years quite regularly with my research, and I never felt particularly threatened. I always felt it was okay, even sitting on the side of a road and waiting for a car, just for the tires to get changed on my own with my sister, and nothing seemed to be worrying. And now the situation has gone so bad that kids can't go to schools because they feel so threatened by bandits. So I just wondered whether this was not in the south. This was really near Morandaf. So it's not, it's, you know, not even in a particularly hugely endangered area. So I wondered whether, you know, you have any comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you what area of the country were those children at? You said around Morandaf. That's interesting. You know, security is
that
not.
It's that where that river runs down. You know, north of Morandaf.
Right.
It's part of Itsingi, but it's not the Tsingi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a general idea of where that is.
Yeah.
So, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time either in this presentation or in my book talking about the security situation in Madagascar, but that's obviously one of the aftershocks, one of the effects with all of this this lack of progress and this economic insecurity. You know, people resort to desperate measures to make ends meet, sometimes to criminal measures. And in Antananarivo, I felt at night, I felt like it was dangerous. You know, I didn't like to go to too many places at night in Antananarivo. When I was in the south, I was very careful. Well, not as careful as I should have been, but you know, banditry is still a fact of life in the south. For a time there, things seem to be improving, but it sounds like you're hearing that things have taken a turn for the worse, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay, I see there are 4 hands up now, so if people can perhaps fit those in, if everyone tries to keep their questions fairly concise. Dr. Pierre has had his hand up for the longest, I think.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Pierre. I'm part of the former Chevening Scholar. I just want to raise 2 points about politics in Madagascar. I do politics since 20 years now, and I'm in this area, and I've lived in many areas. I'm from Fianarantsoa in the central part of Madagascar, but I've lived in the northern part and so eastern part of Madagascar. So I know a little bit all of the country. So I just want to mention that Madagascar is not only all about Rajoelina and Ravalomanana, because those 2 people, they are just, I think they created and just entertained rivalry between Malagasy people since 2019. So I think that if the election for the next election is transparent, fair, and there is all of the candidates will have the same chance. I mean, if we can mitigate the power of money in people's choice, I think that there is a good future for Madagascar. That is one. And also, I want to raise another point that the problem of Madagascar is in terms of development and progress. It's because most of the candidates who took the power, they have not prepared to take the power. Most of them, they took the power by chances. They didn't have enough time to prepare, and they have nothing at all in terms of real program before taking the power. Let's talk about Rajoelina, for example. He said that everything, all of the money for this for his mandate has been already there before the propaganda. But what happens now? What happens now is that there's nothing. It's just like 1 month ago that they launched the program to progress Madagascar. It's now that they try to convince people to finance it. So that's the main problem of Madagascar. That there are people who are well prepared. Those political party who have like a program to develop the country, but they cannot take the power because of the election is biased. It's not fair, the election. Thank you. I don't know if you understand what I mean by that.
Yeah, you know, I'd like to focus on your first point actually the most. Next year's election, it sounds like you're of the opinion that Rajoelina has a chance to be defeated. And if that's true, do you have someone in mind as who will emerge as his main challenger?
There's a lot of people, for example, as I told you that I'm in a political party, we are preparing something for Madagascar now. We have a meeting every week to prepare for that. But first of all, it's not the problem is not who it will be. That is not the problem. The problem is that how to prepare a transparent, fair, and a best election, like in those other African countries like Ghana, for example, that all of people, like for example, if Madagascar has always like more than 10 candidates every election, you know. So I think that it's feasible to beat both of them.
We will see. You know, you may be right. I think one clear candidate has to emerge though as a challenger to Rajoelina, as opposed to just 8 or 10 people who take him on. Otherwise, he's so powerful that that may be difficult. But we'll see.
And also, I think that it depends on France as well. I don't know, one of you have mentioned that there is influence of other country, but most of those countries always follow the position of France when they talk about Madagascar. Like, for example, during the crisis in 2002, it was, they just followed the position of France. And that's the same like in 2009, when France said, we will do this, all of those countries will just follow. And hopefully, I think that France will are no longer agree to have Rajoelina in the power as well. So,
well, that would be a big change if they did that. But again, so much to see over the next year.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay, question from Jenny.
Hello. So I have a quick question. You kind of touched on it when you were talking about China, but from a foreign investment perspective, with the current administration, are global companies still interested in invested in Madagascar, or are they reluctant given to the political instability and corruption?
Well, the fact that there's been 2 successive elections that were, at least by the international community, deemed free and fair, have really helped the investment climate in Madagascar, although you wouldn't see that yet in their economic numbers. So it's definitely, the climate is better now than it was in, say, 2010, even 2015. But I think, you know, Forbes magazine ranks countries by their investment climate, and Madagascar is somewhere in the middle when it comes to African countries in terms of which countries foreign investors are most likely to invest. So I think things have slowly gotten better on that front, but you know, we'll see how stable the election is next year, and that will determine, I think, a lot of people's decisions on whether Madagascar is a safe place to go or not.
Okay, thank you. We've got one more hand up from Harry. Perhaps we'll wrap up with that question and move on. Harry.
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you, Nate, for your nice presentation. I'm living in the US. I have left Madagascar almost 50 years ago. And I started to read your book. I really liked the historical coverage. So I was wondering if you could share your bibliography, the references, because I have myself hard time to build the past of my country, and sharing the references would be very helpful. Now, as I am sensing all the feedback on the chat, I see a recurring theme. We always care about, we are very sensitive to the greed of the people in power. And for myself, based on my being away from the country, looking at that from far away, I think we have to accept whoever is in power and try to empower him, try to remove the corruption, and one way to do that is really, and this is really lacking in Madagascar. I know Dr. Pierre is from Fianarantsoa. I grew up in Fianarantsoa. I was born in Antala, so I'm a kind of a very mixed Malagasy. I spent all my life, most of it in Antananarivo. But inclusion is really a big problem. And Nate, as you were talking about the lack of reaction of the central power in regard to the South, it's part of that lack of inclusion. So that is something that really we need to try to address. And we need to accept maybe whoever in power to ensure stability, because changing power every 5 years would not make the country great. I'm not pro Rajoelina or anything. I'm just neutral, but I think the country needs stability. And also, as Nate pointed out, the problem in Madagascar is more traditional, spiritual. So they would care more about how they are being treated, perceived, rather than the materialistic side. So whoever is prepared to get in power needs to take into account those factors. And last, how can we do something here in the US, maybe under your leadership, Nate, to congregate to help people in Madagascar? I'm ready to be part of that process, but I'm not ready to lead for that. Okay, thank you.
No, great comments, Ari, and you know, maybe you and I can talk some more offline about what we can do here in the US to help Madagascar, as well as the bibliography. I'd be happy to share some of the historical references that I have with you, so you can read more about the history of the country that in the way that I did. So, you know, please get my email address from Daniel, and we can keep in touch. One quick thing I wanted to mention. You mentioned that your highest interest or highest priority right now is for stability, and that's fascinating to me, because I heard that time and again from people when I asked them about Rajoelina. They said, you know, I don't really care at this point if he is good or bad. Obviously, I'd prefer for him to be good, but I don't want him. The key thing for me is I don't want him to be overthrown, because we've seen in the past how damaging that is to growth and really life in general in Madagascar. So there are a lot of people who are, if not rooting for him to do well, at least rooting for him to stay in power throughout the end of his term and maybe into his next term, so that within Madagascar and outside of Madagascar, people say, wow, this is a much more stable place than we thought it was.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks. That's a lot of very engaging and searching questions, and I think we could probably continue this debate for another hour, but I'm conscious of the time, and we need to move on. So thanks to Nathaniel for that really insightful talk, and to everyone who contributed with their comments. And as Nathaniel said, if anyone wants to continue the conversation, if you get in touch with the Anglo-Malagasy Society through our email or Facebook page or whatever, we're happy to forward any comments so that you can continue the dialogue. So if we've just got a few minutes, is the British ambassador in Antananarivo, David Ashley, are you there? If I could invite you to
I am indeed, Daniel.
Hello, David. Would you like to just give us a couple of minutes update on what the embassy has been doing this year in Madagascar?
Thank you. I was going to limit myself to the last week or two, but you've asked for a whole year, which might be a bit difficult. I restrained myself from commenting on the interesting discussion. Thank you, Nathaniel, for your presentation and the interesting discussion which ensued. But I refrain myself from expressing a view. But maybe just to say that we have, apropos of that, we have Stefan Durkin, who was the chief economist to the Department for International Development, DFID, and was also foreign policy advisor to international affairs advisor to the former foreign secretary. He's a professor at Oxford. He's actually going to be in Tanna next week, partly to have some of those discussions around kind of the sort of question which Nathaniel raised, which is sort of why Madagascar hasn't developed in a way that some other countries have. So we'll be doing a talk at my residence next week. So if anyone is in Tanna and wishes to join, seats are at a premium, but if they want to get in touch with me, they can. Also, apropos of next week, we have a Christmas event for British nationals and spouses who are in Tanna. So again, I think we've been in touch with all the Brits that we know of. But if there are others who haven't been invited and would like to come on Wednesday evening, do let me know. We hope to see a strong turnout of the small but perfectly formed British community in Tenerife. And then just in terms of things that we've been doing, I'll be very brief because otherwise I could go on for a long time. But we launched last week, officially launched the program led by Kew Gardens, but with a number of other organisations, funded by the Biodiverse Landscape Fund of DEFRA, of the Department for Environment. That is the biggest investment that the UK has made in the environment of Madagascar, to my knowledge, ever. There will be a 6-year program working in 9 protected areas across Madagascar. You may well have heard about it more at your recent meeting, Daniel. But that's important and exciting. Clearly, there are huge issues facing the environment, as there is facing many other aspects of Madagascar society. But through that and through the at least 9 Darwin-funded projects that we have ongoing in Madagascar, Darwin Fund being again a DEFRA fund. We are doing our bit on that. We're also doing our bit in terms of the humanitarian situation, both in the south, affected by drought, which Nathaniel talked about, but also in the southeast, the areas affected by the cyclones at the beginning of this year. So we have support ongoing in terms of those areas, and we otherwise remain engaged members of the international community here, encouraging trade both ways. So again, if there's British businesses interested in investing in Madagascar, or Malagasy companies seeking to export to Madagascar, we continue to encourage that. We did a seminar a month or so ago on the implementation of the Economic Partnership Agreement, and we remain open to any ideas about how we can support Madagascar's economy through trade with the UK and elsewhere. That's in addition to our continued support on education, health, and family planning in particular. I will stop there, but hopefully people know how to get in touch with the embassy. But if we're on Facebook or on Twitter, we're at the website and so forth. So we always welcome contacts from people who are either in Britain or have close links to both Britain and Madagascar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David, for that fast update. It sounds like there's plenty going on. If I could just ask you to keep your camera on for 1 second. I'm just about to introduce some of the Chevening Scholars. I know there's 8 Chevening Scholars this year in the UK, 3 or 4 of whom are on this call, and I'm just going to introduce themselves very briefly. But perhaps if you could just give a kind of 60-second explanation of what the Chevening Scholarship is to those attendees who don't know about the Chevening Scholars.
Sure. So the Chevening Scholarship is a program by the British government to support professionals to study in the UK for a 1-year master's. Can be in any subject. It covers most countries in the world. We have around 10 or so Chevening Scholars from Madagascar each year, studying in universities across the UK in different subjects. The aim is to support future leaders of Madagascar in whatever field. So we have a wide variety of subjects covered, and I'm delighted that we have both existing and previous Chevening Scholars on this call. We continue to like to have further scholarships that if any organizations or companies or philanthropists wish to support additional scholarships, again, we'd be delighted to do that, because we know that this is an important way to support Madagascar and support some brilliant young people. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So any of the current cohort of Chevening Scholars who would like just to introduce themselves briefly, say where and what they are studying, and perhaps a couple of sentences about how your research ties in with Madagascar and perhaps with today's talk. I don't know if Cedric or somebody wants to, or okay, Mitansu is putting her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
All right. So, hello everyone. I'm Mitansua, and I study applied linguistics in EFL here in Bangor, in Wales. And I think how it ties, I'm not really sure about the research I would like to do yet, but at least in what I see and what we've been talking, how I see things is I'm really passionate about education, and I do believe that that's another major key point of start in development in Madagascar, because that obviously we help people to think critically through education so that they make better decision in who to vote and why voting is really important. Just to say an example, I also think, so that's one of my aspirations. I also think that we do not really focus that much on the teacher trainings in Madagascar whatsoever. Probably you know about the FRAM situation and how it all ties in. So there is just a lack of accountability towards the authorities and towards even us teachers somehow in developing younger generations and in encouraging them to pursue education. And it's not really their fault, because we also know that I saw one of the comments that if you're hungry, then how can you think about politics, for example? And I just feel like it's again like all ties together, but we need to find a solution that would be more sustainable, meaning holding us, Malagasy, accountable in our development and using foreign aids like in the right way, minimizing corruption. That's how I see it. And I think that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mitansu. And now I think David Fitiana has his hand up. Hi, David.
Hello. Thank you very much for this talk. It was very interesting. My name is David, and I study data science and artificial intelligence at Bournemouth University. And as mentioned during the presentation, climate change is a challenge for Madagascar, and the agricultural sector is one of the sectors that really suffers from it. Sometimes the rainy season has shrunk, and sometimes when it rains, the rain is very intense, and we need to develop tools, digital tools that can help farmers coping with this change in the weather patterns. So that's what I'm studying here. I want to develop tools that can help farmers optimize their irrigation, detect disease or pests in the crops as early as possible. So that's what I'm studying. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And next, I think Andry, who's at LSE. Would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. So my name is Andry Rajoelina. I'm doing a Master of Science and Development Studies at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. My background is in natural resource management, but I want to link this with more political economy point of view. As we all know, we always say that Madagascar is rich in natural resources, but how to translate this into economic and social prosperity of Madagascar. So that's what I'm currently studying here at LSE right now, to make some kind of comparative analysis between Madagascar and other countries. How did they manage the resource properly, and how can we get lessons from other countries with our context in order to develop Madagascar? Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, I think of the Chevening Scholars on this call is Cedric, who I think is at Brunel. We've already heard a question from Cedric, but if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about your studies.
Yes, hi again. So I'm studying a master's in Children, Youth and International Development here in London at the Brunel University. Prior to my master's, I've been in the South, where our author has been. My aim for the master's is actually to understand why development projects, development discourse hasn't been efficient in Madagascar, knowing that, for example, the southern Madagascar has been the target of 40 years or so of development projects, and just surprisingly not efficient. So I'm here to understand the international discourse of development, and yeah, from a social scientist perspective, I think I really value our Malagasy culture. I'm from the South. I've been traveling around Madagascar. I love our very cultural wealth, dialects, this diversity of our people, and maybe take advantage of that to kind of get a sense of identity. Why are we in this situation right now? And yeah, I think that this is a starting point to kind of tackle the development discourse in our way, how we Malagasy people will define development. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you, and yeah, the best of luck with all of the Cheveners for their master's programs here in the UK. I've just got a couple of quick messages then before we wrap up. Irene from Money for Madagascar has asked me to pass on their sincere thanks from Money for Madagascar to the AMS and AMS members for the donation of £1,000 to their big give appeal for the Education for Life, which we gave through a scheme which multiplied the donation by 6, and so Money for Madagascar benefited by £6,000. And Irene says, overall, we have received £50,000 of donations to this appeal, which will be tripled by the ADSUM Foundation to make £160,000 for the next expansion of our Education for Life schools programme. So please pass on our thanks to AMS members for all of their support. So it just remains really for me to once again mention that all of the dates for 2023 AMS events online and offline are on our website, on our Facebook. Just to run through them very quickly. Saturday, the 25th of March, we will meet again on Zoom online. Then our next physical meeting in London will be on the 28th of June. That's a Wednesday evening, when actually we'll be having another book launch talk, this time for a book called Mission to Madagascar, The Sergeant, the King and the Slave Trade, which is published next year by Blackwater Press and written by David H. Mould, who is Professor Emeritus of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University. It's essentially a biography of James Hastie, who negotiated the treaty to end the export of slaves from Madagascar and served as a British agent at the court of Radama I. So that's our speaker in June, and then we have another physical event in London on the 28th of October, and almost exactly a year from now, on Saturday the 9th of December, a Zoom meeting. Also on our website, anyone who's not a member and is interested in joining the society, you can sign up on the website and you can see about the benefits of membership, one of which is receiving our quarterly newsletter. You can see some examples of the newsletter on the website to anyone who's interested. And the next issue of the newsletter, I'm, as I say, I've got a copy of Nathaniel's book, and we'll be reviewing that and writing something about that for the next newsletter. A recording of this meeting is going to be available on our website sometime in the next few days. So if you want to watch again or know anyone who missed out and wants to see Nathaniel's talk, you'll be able to send them the link. And I think that is pretty much all the messages. So once again, thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to Nathaniel for his excellent talk. Wishing everyone a wonderful Christmas and Happy New Year 2023, especially hoping for free and fair and stable elections in Madagascar. And let's hope everything goes well. And see you at the Zoom meeting on the 25th of March. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.